Hello, this is Jeremy Sweeten from Dafter, Michigan. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we've improved our farm with bale grazing. Our farm's located in the eastern upper peninsula of Michigan, and we farm about 670 acres of Timothy hay, a couple hundred acres of Timothy trefoil and clover hay. We either own or rent 450 acres of pasture, and we run about 90 fall calving cow-calf pairs on those acres of pasture, with the goal of weaning our calves at spring green up and then run those animals, weaned animals as stalkers through mid-October when we sell them back to the gentleman we raise cattle for. So these are all grass-fed animals, um, all the way from birth through finishing. In addition, we also summer graze or custom graze 50 cow-calf pairs in a more traditional pasture setting where we're just rotating, you know, weekly. So kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're trying to make everything work for what we do with our farm. So our overall goal is to improve our soil health and fertility without going broke. Where we live, you can't just call the co-op up and order fertilizer blended the way you want it. Our resources are really limited. We have high magnesium lime, and so finding high calcium lime is hard to do. It's expensive to get in. One of the few fertility resources we have are either triple 19 fertilizer or urea, and there again it's $400+ a ton for any of that, and it's not in the balance that we need. So our goal is to try to use bale grazing and improve our soil health through good cattle management rather than buying commercial fertilizer. Some more background about our soils is we run anywhere from a pH of 5.5 to up to 6. So they're flat, wet clay soils with a low pH, high magnesium levels. They're low in phosphorus. You can see here on the slide anywhere from 3 to 15 parts per million. And our organic matter ranges anywhere from 4.5 to 7.5%, which that's the cool thing about our 120-day grazing season or growing season, is that the organic matter doesn't break down very well with the heat or time. So a little bit about bale grazing is we're feeding our fall and winter hay on pasture without bale feeders, without bale rings, without feed wagons, without unrolling them. We're just setting them out, and we're trying to spread our manure and organic matter out evenly across the field. We try to sell our cash crop hay to the horse market in big square bales, and then we buy most of our beef hay either as bale silage or round bales, and then we wet wrap our excess pasture to save back on the farm, so we're not shipping any nutrients off. And by buying hay, we're actually a net import of nutrients. And right now, this year in 2020, our beef hay is running $60 to $65 a ton. So with my off-farm job, we usually try to feed for a week at a time, and so that's another reason that we don't use bale feeders, is because it's not fair to my wife to have to try to manage cattle with bale feeders. So this slide shows where we want to go. We want to improve our biological activity, improve on our organic matter content, which is going to improve our nutrient cycling, ultimately improving our soil structure and improving our water availability. So right now on our farm, we're ranging between organic matter turnover and improving water availability, just depending where we're at, what we've done with our farm and the previous management practices it's had. Our soils are 6 to 8 inches of clay loam over up to 300 feet of red clay. So this is old lake plain. So drainage is really important to us, as well as water holding capacity. So to overwinter a cow-calf pair from a fall calving herd, we're running 10 to 12 800-pound round bales per pair. So that comes out to 8,000 to 9,600 pounds of hay per pair for the winter. So due to our lower cost ground and low hay prices, we can afford to feed more hay in the winter. In the fall, we try to set out 2 to 500 round bales, depending on what the ground conditions are, in about a 30-foot grid pattern. So there's approximately 30 feet between each bale in both directions. And we've found out by either reading university extension publications from Canada or our own experience that this is a good spacing to get good manure and organic matter distribution without making the mat too thick in the spring. So when the ground's firm, when we bring hay in that we purchase, we try to set it out in this grid pattern, and the bales are either net wrapped or plastic twine. The plastic twine bales, we can cut the twine off as we feed and pull it out without disturbing the bale. The net wrap bales, we bring the skid loader back in and tip them over on their side and then unwind the net wrap or cut it off. So either way, we try to keep the bales wrapped or in twine as long as we can, so we preserve as much hay quality so it doesn't want to slough off and the cattle refuse to eat it. So the other interesting thing we've done is by setting these bales out in a September time frame is it allows us to stockpile pasture. So the stockpile pasture plus about 50 bales an acre. In this picture, there's 90 cow-calf pairs that have calved fairly recently, and we strip graze the bales. So we're giving them 12 bales or 24 bales at a time. The poly wire shown here in the middle allows the calves to go under the fence and eat the best pasture or get the best hay that's available. So we're essentially creep feeding our calves while they still can come back and nurse off mom. It's really turned out to be a pretty good system. So this slide shows some of the residue left as they're bale grazing. We make them clean that up before we give them more bales or turn them into the next section. What happens then is as snow comes on, the poly wires don't stay up, and we turn them into the remaining group of bales. In 2019, the winter of 2019, we had approximately 100 bales still out, and the cows were turned into the rest of them. And versus feeding 12 at a time and feeding those 100, we actually added a couple days to our grazing days or our bales per day, if that makes sense. So 12 bales were lasting us 2.5 days. Those 100 bales actually gained a couple more days versus strip grazing. So it was kind of interesting to see the animal behavior on that. So then once we get a snowpack down, this shows how we set the bales out in a line, set them on in so we can unwrap them. These are silage bales of Timothy and red clover, and we try to feed anywhere from 2 days to a week at a time depending on what my off-farm work schedule is. This shows how the manure is distributed and how it looks, how the hay is cleaned up after the grazing's done. We figure that each round bale is worth anywhere from $6 to $8 in fertility, anywhere from nitrogen, which may or may not hang around in the form of organic matter, the phosphorus and potassium that's left. But this is an even distribution as a manure spreader would provide. Doesn't always turn out this nice, but this is our goal. This is from the winter of 2018/19. We had over 40 inches of snow on the ground. 4.5-foot fence posts were underneath snow drifts. We had a hard winter, and we decided that it was better to feed anywhere from 2 to 5 days at a time rather than turning the animals into a group of 100 bales, because the calves would have a hard time getting through this much snow to get to the round bales that were stockpiled out there. If it was just a group of dry cows, I think they would do fine. But in this picture where the cattle are walking, there's almost 2 feet of snow underneath the cows. So just give you reference what we have to do. So this picture also starts to tell a story of how our bale grazing has gone. So we have an area where the hillsides have been eroded, and we wanted to improve the fertility on them. So we started strategically feeding hay on there while there was snowpack, so that the animals wouldn't actually tear the ground up. The snow would act as an armor, but we'd still get the manure and hay residue scattered out across the hillsides. So this is the winter of 2018 and 19. So this is a better overall view showing how we're feeding on the poorest parts of the hills, and we try to systematically cover these hills in a grid pattern as much as possible with feeding with a skid loader. This is what spring of 2019 looks like. You can see just at green up that some of the residue was heavier in some areas than others. And some of that was because we had so many winter storms, we just had to feed hay where the cattle could get out of the wind. But overall, it's a long-term gain because we still got our goal accomplished. It's just some of the residue is a little thicker, and we'll continue this progress. So this is a close-up a few days later, spring of 2019, showing how the clover and the grasses are coming back through that bale grazing area. And this is some of the best forage we've ever seen in this area. This shows June of 2019, and it's even more impressive with how thick the hay is. You can see on some of the hilltops where we still overfed too much hay. It will take until 2020 for those areas to recover completely, but then it'll be tremendous pasture after that. And just as a side note, once again, we have never seen this much grass on these hillsides. They had been moldboard plowed in their previous life, and there's virtually no topsoil or fertility there at all. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is the first year that we had cattle, and these are yearling stalker cattle, and this is a traditional Eastern Upper Peninsula Timothy trefoil clover pasture. And this was taken June 24th, and I would say this is still their first rotation going through. So it's not a bad looking pasture, but we also knew we wanted to start bale grazing. So this was an experimental area, and here is the next picture after a year of bale grazing in 17. Here's what this year looked like. So this is almost to the day the same pasture in 2019. So 3 years later after one season of bale grazing, and these are full-size cows in that same area, and look how much more grass and clover we have. The only thing I've done is bale graze it and add 6 to 8 pounds of red clover and a little bit of ladino clover. So it's pretty impressive how well that has came back and improved our ground with nothing more than feeding hay on it and letting the cattle do the rest of the work. This is an area that we bale grazed in the winter of 18 and 19. We just got started, and then the ground conditions didn't allow us to get back out there. But we were really dry through the summer of 2019. And this shows how the nutrients and the water holding capacity from bale grazing affected our pasture just in one season. Yeah, the forage stands a little bit thinner from the residue, but the height and the quality difference is so much better. And even in the background, you can see some other spots where we fed hay. So it's pretty impressive. This is a really dramatic photo showing what just a little bit of management can do to help you improve your farm. So the bale grazing works in the fall, winter, and early spring as the ice pack is on or the snow pack is on. But once that goes away, our ground gets really soft and muddy, so we have to isolate our cattle onto a smaller sacrifice area, a feedlot if you want to say. So we'll go ahead and do that to save most of our perennial pastures, and then we come back in and seed some type of annual diverse species cover crop mix. Usually we come through, work the ground to get it leveled back out so we can get a drill through it and get good seed soil contact, because the cattle are pretty hard on it with their trails and pugging it up. But this is just in the feedlot area. So, our equipment's not new, but it works, and the whole goal is just to get the seed on the ground so it can grow. Another thing that we've done is in those areas where we're renovating is to go ahead and seed our perennial crop underneath the cover crop mix, because our growing season's so short. We're trying to take advantage of getting two things going at once. This is a picture of a field of tall fescue and red clover that's seeded underneath a diverse cover crop mix, predominantly sorghum and sorghum Sudan grass, all BMR products. So this shows what grazing looks like in this area. We'll keep the cattle in there longer and let them go ahead and clean up the stalks and the forage that they've trampled, but not let them get into the perennial crop that's underneath. So interestingly, this is what the residue looked like on the ground. I'm not too concerned about leaving that, because that just helps feed the soil biology and make a better field later on. This is another picture showing a different diverse cover crop mix that we did that was more predominantly cool seasons, and the weather favored those. So there's oats, turnips, radishes, peas, even a few sunflowers in there. And there was some sorghum Sudan grass and pearl millet, but because of the cool, wet growing conditions, those didn't come on very well, but the cool season crops did really well. So I'd like to thank you for your time, for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us through the website, and we can help you come up with a grazing plan or a forage rotation plan, and be glad to help you out in any way that we can.